Some men carry their faith like armor, but Father Marcus carried his like chains. The town of Graywell had a way of forgetting its sins every Sunday morning. People filed into St. Augustine's with their best clothes and their worst secrets, and Father Marcus Hale received both without flinching. He had done it for 27 years. He had become so good at it that some days he forgot where his duty to God ended and his duty to the truth began. The missing girl's name was Lily Carr. She was 16, a quiet student who worked weekends at the bakery on Marsh Street, and she had not been seen in 11 days. Her mother had plastered her face on every telephone pole between the church and the highway, and still the only sound coming from the police station was the hum of indifference. Detective Sorrell called it a complex case. The town called it a tragedy. Marcus called it something he could not yet say out loud. He first heard about Lily's disappearance the way he heard about most things, through the side door of the church in the voice of someone who assumed he already knew. Mrs. Carr herself came to him 3 days in, eyes swollen, hands shaking around a paper coffee cup that had long gone cold. "They're not looking, Father," she said. "They shake my hand and write things down, and then they go home for dinner." Marcus had sat with her for 2 hours and said the things a priest is supposed to say. Every word tasted like ash. The confessional booth at St. Augustine's was an old thing, dark mahogany, worn smooth by decades of restless hands. Marcus had sat on his side of that screen more times than he could count, listening to the quiet avalanche of human weakness, regretful actions, dishonest acts, unkindness dressed up as guidance. He had never repeated a single word. The seal of confession was not a rule to him. It was a wall he had built his entire life against, and he had never once considered what might be on the other side. On the 12th day, late at night, Marcus recalled a past assignment from 9 years ago. It surfaced not as a memory, but as a sudden, overwhelming feeling. A man's voice calm, deliberate, recounted an action he had taken for a junior colleague. It was not Lily, as the timing did not fit. However, the specifics and the detached manner of speaking as if discussing a minor task were familiar. Marcus had assigned a task as part of the process and then moved on. He had not mentioned it since. He did not sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with a glass of water. He never drank and stared at the wall until the light outside changed from black to gray. The man in that confession booth 9 years ago had given no name. They rarely did. But he had said enough. He had mentioned the old Callaway property on the edge of town, the one with the broken gate and the pond that froze every January. He had mentioned it the way people mention places they feel safe. And the Callaway family was the closest thing Graywell had to royalty. The Callaways had funded the restoration of St. Augustine's roof 12 years ago. Their name was on the new wing of the hospital. Richard Callaway sat on the town council and coached Little League on Saturday mornings, and his wife organized the charity drives that kept the food bank stocked through winter. Their eldest son, Daniel, had gone to law school and come back to practice locally, defending the kind of people the town preferred not to think about. They were, by every visible measure, the family that held Graywell together. Marcus had married Richard and Helen. He had baptized their children. Canon law on the seal of confession was not ambiguous. It was absolute. A priest who violated the confessional seal faced automatic excommunication, not as a punishment handed down by a bishop, but as an immediate self-executing consequence the moment the words left his mouth. Marcus had studied this. He had taught it. He believed in it. Not because the church told him to, but because he understood what happened to a community when people could no longer trust that their darkest moments stayed buried. The entire architecture of confession depended on silence. One crack, and the whole structure collapsed. On the 13th day, Detective Sorrell held a press conference that lasted 6 minutes and said nothing. Lily's mother stood at the back of the room with her arms crossed tight over her chest, not crying, just watching the way a person watches when they have run out of the energy to hope. Marcus stood beside her, and as Sorrell shuffled his papers and talked about ongoing inquiries, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not a decision, not yet, but the first crack in a wall he had spent 27 years reinforcing. He looked at Mrs. Carr's face and thought about the man in the booth. He thought about absolution freely given. He thought about what it had cost and who had paid it. The rectory office was small and smelled of old paper and candle wax. Marcus sat behind his desk with the parish records open in front of him, though he was not reading them. He was thinking about the word cooperation and how differently it sounded depending on which side of a confession screen you were standing on. He had spent the morning in prayer and come out of it with no answer, only a louder version of the same question he had been carrying for 2 days. God, it seemed, was not offering directions, only silence, which Marcus was beginning to resent. He called the diocese that afternoon. He did not say Lily's name. He did not say the Calloway name. He simply asked, in the careful language of a man testing the edges of a fence, whether there were any circumstances under which the seal could be lifted. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Monsignor Ferris, a man Marcus had known for 20 years, a man who spoke in full paragraphs and never used one word when 4 would do. "The seal is inviolable, Marcus," Ferris said. "That is not a position the church has taken lightly. It is the position the church has held without exception for over 1,000 years." Marcus thanked him and hung up before Ferris could ask why he was asking. He drove past the Calloway property that evening without stopping. The gate was new now, black iron, with a keypad, nothing like the broken wooden frame the voice in the booth had described 9 years ago. The pond was still there, visible through the bare trees, flat and dark in the early March cold. Marcus sat in his car at the edge of the road for a long time, engine running, hands on the wheel, looking at the water. He thought about what was in it. He thought about whether thinking about it made him responsible for what he knew. Father Daniel Marsh, the only other priest Marcus trusted completely, drove 2 hours from the city to have dinner with him that Thursday. Marcus had called him under the pretense of needing company, which was not entirely a lie. They ate reheated soup and bread and talked around the subject for an hour before Daniel set down his spoon and said, "You didn't call me for soup, Marcus." Marcus looked at him across the table and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Daniel leaned back and said very quietly, "Whatever it is, I can't unknow it if you tell me." Marcus nodded. "I know," he said. "That's why I haven't." The debate inside him had stopped being theological sometime around day 14. It had become something rawer and more personal, the kind of argument that did not care about canon law or precedent or the structural integrity of the sacrament. A girl was missing. He had information, not proof, information, the kind that could not be verified without an investigation he was not allowed to trigger. He turned it over and over in his mind, the way you turn a stone in your hand, looking for something useful, finding only its weight. On day 15, a boy named Theo Garza, 14 years old and rail-thin, came to the church alone and asked to speak with Marcus. He sat in the front pew with his hands between his knees and said that Lily was his friend. He said that 2 weeks before she disappeared, she had told him she was scared of someone, but she would not say who. He said the police had talked to him for 20 minutes and not written anything down. Marcus listened to all of it without interrupting. When Theo finished, he looked up at Marcus with the particular expression of someone who still believes adults have access to solutions, and said, "You're supposed to help people, right? That's the whole thing." Marcus felt those words land somewhere in the center of his chest and stay there. That night, he found the man's name. He had not gone looking for it, or that was what he told himself. But 9 years ago, before he fully understood the weight of what he carried, he had written a single line in a private journal he kept locked in the bottom drawer of his desk. Not a confession, not a violation, just a date, a time, and 2 initials written in the shaking hand of a man who had just heard something that frightened him and needed to put it somewhere outside his own head. He opened the journal. He looked at the initials. DC Daniel Calloway, the eldest son, the lawyer. He closed the file and sat at his desk for a long time. The clock on the wall marked each minute with a sound that seemed louder than it had any right to be. Daniel Calloway had sat across from Marcus at meetings. He had shaken Marcus's hand after events every year for the last decade. He had a wife, 2 daughters, a career built on the reputation of a man the company trusted. And 9 years ago, he had spoken in a meeting and described in a calm and even voice something Marcus had filed away as a challenging experience and never revisited. The record had felt protective then. Now, it felt like something else entirely. Marcus did not go to the police that night. He went to the church instead, walked to the confessional booth in the dark, and sat on his side of the screen without turning on the light. He stayed there for a long time, not praying exactly, more like listening. The booth smelled the same as it always had, wood and old cloth and something underneath that had no name, the accumulated breath of 27 years of human confession. He thought about every person who had ever sat on the other side of that screen and trusted him with the thing they could not say anywhere else. He thought about what his silence had given them. He thought about what it had cost. On the morning of day 16, Lily Carr's backpack was found at the edge of the Calloway property, half hidden under a tangle of dead brush near the fence line. By noon, the police had cordoned off the area. By evening, Detective Sorrell was standing in front of cameras again, this time with less paperwork and more discomfort, talking about new developments and pursuing active leads. Marcus watched the news from the rectory, standing in the doorway of his kitchen, still holding a dish towel, and felt the world tilt, slightly, on its axis. The investigation had found its way to the Calloway property without him, but it had not found Lily. And he knew something Sorrell did not. Something that could change the direction of the search entirely, and the seal around it was still intact, and he was still a priest, and the clock on the wall was still counting. Detective Sorrell knocked on the rectory door at 7 in the morning, which told Marcus everything about how the night had gone. The detective looked like a man who had not slept, which gave him, for the first time, the appearance of someone who actually cared. He sat across from Marcus at the kitchen table, with a recorder on the table between them, and said, "Father, we believe Lily Carr was on that property. We need to know if anyone in this community said anything to you that might help us understand why." Marcus looked at the recorder. He looked at Sorrell. He said, "You know I can't answer that question the way you want me to." Sorrell leaned forward and said, "A 16-year-old girl is missing, Father." Marcus said, "I know. I've been living with that longer than you have." After Sorrell left, Marcus sat at the table without moving for 40 minutes. The recorder was gone, but the question it represented was still sitting in the room with him, taking up space, breathing the same air. He had not lied to Sorrell. He had not told the truth. He had done the thing priests learn to do, which is to exist precisely in the gap between those two positions and call it faithfulness. But it did not feel like faithfulness anymore. It felt like a door he was holding shut with his body, while something terrible happened on the other side. He called Monsignor Ferris again that afternoon. This time, he did not speak in careful language. He said, I have reason to believe I heard something in confession that is directly relevant to an active missing persons case. I need to know if there is any path at all, that does not require me to choose between the sacrament and a child's life." Ferris was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Marcus, the church has considered this question for centuries. The answer has never changed." Marcus said, "The church considered it in the abstract. I am living it in a specific house, in a specific town, with a specific girl's face on every telephone pole between here and the highway." Ferris said he would pray for him. Marcus thanked him and meant none of it. On day 18, Daniel Calloway came to the church. He walked in through the side door during the afternoon quiet, when the building was empty, and found Marcus in the sacristy folding linens with the methodical focus of a man trying to keep his hands occupied. Daniel was dressed in his work clothes, charcoal suit, polished shoes, the uniform of a man accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room. He stood in the doorway and said, "I heard Sorrel came to see you." Marcus did not stop folding. "People talk in small towns," he said. Daniel said, "They do." Then neither of them spoke for a long time, and the silence between them was not the comfortable kind. "I need to know where we stand, Father." Daniel's voice was level, controlled, the voice of a man who had spent years in courtrooms learning how to drain emotion from language. Marcus set down the linen he was holding and turned to face him. "We stand exactly where we have always stood," Marcus said. "You know what that means." Daniel looked at him for a moment with an expression Marcus could not fully read, something between relief and calculation. "Good," Daniel said. He straightened his jacket. He thanked Marcus in the tone of a man closing a business transaction. And then he left. And Marcus stood in the sacristy and understood, with complete and terrible clarity, that Daniel Calloway had just come to confirm that his confession still held. He had come to check the lock on his own cage, smuck. Marcus went home and opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out the journal. He held it in both hands, without opening it. The initials inside were not evidence. They were not a confession transcript. They were not even admissible in any court in the country. They were just 2 letters written by a frightened priest in the middle of the night, which meant they were legally worthless and morally enormous. He thought about burning it. He thought about what burning it would mean and what keeping it would mean, and whether the difference between those 2 things was the last meaningful choice he had left. He did not burn it. Instead, he did something that existed in a space the church had never precisely mapped. He called Mrs. Carr. He did not tell her what he knew. He did not name a name or describe a confession or point in any direction that could be traced back through the seal. He simply said, "The search needs to focus on the water." He said it once, quietly. And then he said he had to go, and he ended the call before she could ask him how he knew. It was not a confession violation. It was not one either. It was the kind of act that existed in the gray space between obedience and conscience, where most of the real decisions in a human life actually get made. Mrs. Carr contacted the tip line that evening. She reported that she had received information suggesting the pond on the Calloway property should be searched. Sorrel, seeking guidance on the next steps, applied for an emergency search warrant by midnight. The following morning, a dive team began their search in the water. They located Lily Carr 4 hours later. She was found in shallow water near the north side of the pond, conscious but suffering from low body temperature and dehydration. She was trapped in a storage area constructed under a dock, an area previously overlooked. She had been there for 18 days and was breathing. The arrest of Daniel Calloway happened 3 days later, quietly, without the press conference his family's lawyers had been maneuvering to prevent. The evidence recovered from the property was enough. The confession Marcus had heard 9 years ago was never mentioned, never entered into any record, never spoken of in any courtroom. The case was built on physical evidence, on Lily's own account, on a search that had been triggered by an anonymous tip that Sorrel never fully traced. Marcus watched the news report from the same doorway where he had stood before, still holding a dish towel, a detail that struck him later as almost absurd given the weight of what had just shifted in the world. The site team was unaware of Dave's actions. The company was unaware. John called to say he was glad the project was finished and that he was wishing the team well. And Dave said thank you, in the voice of a man who had stopped waiting for inspiration to be enough. He continued to lead meetings on Sundays. He continued to process requests in the quiet meeting room with its polished table and its smell of cleaning fluid. People still came to him with their concerns, and he still received them without hesitation. But something had changed in the process he followed, something important, and he felt it every time he sat down at his desk and prepared to listen to what colleagues share in the meeting. He never told anyone. He never stopped wondering if that was the right choice. There is a version of this story where Father Marcus is a hero. There is another version where he broke the most sacred promise a man in his position can make. The town of Graywell has no idea either version exists. Lily Carr is alive. Daniel Calloway is in prison. And every Sunday morning, a priest who is no longer entirely sure what he believes sits in a confessional booth and waits for the next person to tell him something he will have to carry alone. What would you have done in his place?